Juliet, Shalom, salut tout le monde, and welcome. So I wanted to do some videos on to keep going with what we were doing before with Jesus versus the rabbis, showing that Christianity is really the enemy of Judaism, and that to call Jesus a rabbi is not correct. That specifically a rabbi is a teacher of Talmudic, what became Talmudic law, rabbinical Judaism, right? And Christ and the whole New Testament, the apostles, all kind of oppose this ideology, and we're going to do that by going over the story of Jesus and the Canaanite woman. And this is an argument used often by pagans, where they're going to quote the New Testament where, didn't Christ call the Canaanite woman a dog, and they're completely taking that out of context. It's actually the opposite, okay? So we're going to go through that and the Good Samaritan. I think we're going to do those two today. And then after that, we're going to go to Jesus heals the blind man. And this is a very weird story because a lot of people will think it's creepy because Christ takes his spit and mixes it with earth. That rubs the spit with the earth, the mud, on the blind man's eyes, and then the blind man is healed. And what people don't realize about this story is Christ did that because he did that to mock the oral law. He did that to mock the rabbis, to mock what would become the Talmud. This is a law specifically anti-Talmud. So when Christ is doing, he's gaslighting the Jews. That's what Christ is doing when he rubbed the spit on and mud on the guy's eyes. It was to defy Talmudic law. Okay? Same thing with the story with the guy when he healed the guy with the mat. These are very specific laws in what would be codified in the Talmud. Christ is attacking oral law, okay? The law of the rabbis, Judaism, not the laws of the Torah, not the laws of Moses. The rabbis, the Jews, are in opposition to Moses, and that's what we're going to prove in this video. Okay, so it really comes down to, like we went through the last time, Christ versus the Jewish rabbis. Okay, it's Christ versus the Jews. Okay, so what are we talking about? So in the last video, we talked about the oral law, the Talmud, and things that are not found in the Bible. So like the washing of hands, right? This is a commandment from the oral law, from the rabbis, not from Moses. The Corban vows. You won't find these things in the Old Testament. You will not find these things written down by the prophets or by Moses or anyone in the Old Testament. Picking grains on the Sabbath, that is not prohibited. You are allowed to pick grains on the Sabbath if you need to eat. You are not allowed to pick grains on the Sabbath to bring them to the market and sell them. That's what you're not allowed to do. You can't work and profit and make money on the Sabbath. Healing on the Sabbath, the Jews flat out outlawed this, right? You can't heal on the Sabbath. Tithing mint, cumin, dill, etc., vegetable stuff, things Moses never said to tithe these things, and that is to pay taxes to the temple, to pay taxes to the priests, to run the country, okay? The Pharisees invented it so that even small things like your vegetable garden, anything was taxed, right? So this is Talmudic. This is not in the laws of Moses. Swearing by the temple, making vows, I swear by the temple, right? Matthew 23. Divorce for any reason. All these stories taking place with Christ confronting the rabbis. This is Christ's direct opposition to Judaism, okay? Not the Torah, which again, with the temple, no Torah, okay? So even that's gone, and that was Christ's prophecy. The temple will be destroyed. Sabbath travel limits. When the first chapter of Acts mentions it was a Sabbath day's journey. What does that mean? There are no restrictions of how far you can walk on the Sabbath. What the Jews are misquoting there is they're taking, again, they take stories from the Old Testament and then they create laws, things they can imprison you with, things that they can, dictate how you're going to live, create law upon law upon law upon law. It's like Jews can't eat meat with cheese. There's no law that says you can't do that, right? The law says don't boil a a calf, a baby cow in its own mother's milk. And we don't know why you can't do that, but we think it's a pagan ritual that the pagans, the Canaanites, would actually take milk specifically from its own mother and boil. So that's it. So it doesn't say you can't eat cheese with meat. It says don't boil a calf in its mother's milk. And so the Jews now take this law, they run 20,000 miles in the wrong direction with it, and then they create the Talmud. Stuff like that. So all these things are not in the Torah, right? So these are all invented Jewish lies that Christ was fighting, right? And so now what happens is pagans or atheists, or it's mainly the pagans are going to quote this and go, oh, well, the Gentiles are dogs. And Christ and Christians teach that, or, that it's a Jewish religion, and that, and this is absolute insanity. And we're going to prove that. Okay, so this is the story. It's the Samaritan woman. I think it's found in John. It's also found, Matthew. So we're going to go to the Gospel of Matthew, and it talks here about, right, so then Jesus went, and he departed into the coast of Tyre and Sidon. And behold, a woman of Canaan came out of the same coast and cried unto him, saying, have mercy on me, O Lord, thou son of David, my daughter is grievously vexed with a devil. Now again, that word devil is based on the word daimonian, daemon. It just means, it doesn't mean she's demon possessed. That's not what the woman's actually telling Christ in Greek. She's telling Christ that her daughter has a sickness from the gods. Okay? That the gods have given her, it's a sick, what that translates to is we don't know what's wrong with her. She cannot go to a doctor and have this sickness removed. That's what that word, now the word devil, this is a whole other video, but don't think that the woman, that anyone here believes the woman has an evil spirit inside her causing her to be sick. That's not what's being translated here. The word devil is a transliterated word, created word from the Greek, from the word diabolos. They create this word devil, and then they take this word daimonian, right? And then they translate the word daemon with the new word devil that they just created, if that makes any sense. So devil's a transliterated word that they created, and now they take this word that they just created in English, and then they translate this ancient Greek word daemon. But what's really happening here is all the woman is telling Christ is, my daughter has an uncurable disease from the gods. That's what she's saying. She's not saying my daughter's demon possessed. It's ridiculous. Okay, so she's, my daughter's grievously vexed with a devil, an uncurable disease. But he answered her not a word, and his disciples came and besought him, saying, send her away, for she crieth after us. Now Christ was setting this up. And then Christ then says, but he answered and said, I am not sent but unto the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Okay. Then came she and worshipped him, saying, Lord, help me. Okay. She has nowhere else to go. She's heard of this guy, Jesus. And Jesus is like, no, sorry, I'm only for Israel, which isn't true. But he answered and said, it is not meet, okay, it's not fair to take the children's bread and to cast it to dogs. Wow, Christ sounds like a real, racist piece of work. And she said, truth, Lord, yet the dogs eat of the crumbs which fall from their master's table. Then Jesus answered and said unto her, O woman, great is thy faith. Be it unto thee even as thou wilt. And her daughter was made whole from that very hour. So now, number one, if Christ really believed what he just said, he never would have healed the woman. So Christ is either a liar, okay, or something else, something deeper is happening in this story. Because Moses, if Christ actually meant what he said here, he's violating the laws of Moses. Because the laws of Moses, you can't treat foreigners like that in the laws of Moses. Now the Talmud, the oral law, the laws of the Pharisee, that's a different story. Okay? So let's understand a few things. Okay, so what's being said now by a lot of, especially my opposition, my opponents, that the Jews wrote the Bible to enslave the world. Okay, so the Jews invented Moses, Israel, and monotheism. Well, I mean, the Jews were never really monotheists. Like, Moses was a monotheist. Moses tried to revolutionize the world and introduce one God, no one else. There's no Lucifer, fallen angel. Lucifer's not in the Old Testament. Satan is not in the Old Testament, only in Hebrew. And when Satan is mentioned, he's mentioned as a servant of God fighting for God and opposing Israel, right? All Satan means is accuser, right? And Satan more often is on God's side to punish us for our disobedience. So understand that, like, of all of Israel and Judah's kings, only King David, and then Josiah and Hezekiah were monotheists. That means the bulk, 95% of the rulers of Israel and Judah were either pagan or henotheistic. So two next to King David, only two kings of Judah were monotheists. Every other one had pagan temples or except both. Okay? So the Jews, the Bible is really about a group of pagans struggling with the idea of there's only one God. Okay? The Jews invented the oral traditions to fight and contradict themselves. Okay, so that's what's kind of being said right now with my opponents, that the Jews created Moses, then they created the oral Talmudic law to fight against Moses, okay? And then the Jews created Christianity to destroy their previous contradictory religions to maybe conquer the pagan world. So first they created monotheism, the Old Testament, the Torah. Then they created the oral law that fights against itself. And then they created Christianity to destroy both. This is insanity. No people who on earth would do this, okay? So let's put things into perspective. To believe that Jews in the 3rd century BC invented Moses, then invented rabbinical Judaism to contradict Moses, and then invented Jesus and Christianity to destroy both, is to believe that one ethnic group created 3 mutually contradictory religions, each one strategically designed to undermine their own authority, condemn their own history, expose their own sins, dethrone their own leaders, and ultimately empower Gentiles to rule over them for the next 2,000 years. Yep. Or not even that. I mean, the whole narrative. It's just Gentiles, pagans coming in the whole time. The Assyrians coming in to overthrow them. The Babylonians, even before that, the Greeks coming in later, the Persians coming in later, the Romans coming in after that, and then all throughout Israel's history, you've got the Moabites coming in, and then the Amorite, and they got their own. The Philistines are now here. So it's like their whole life is just them being humiliated by pagans. Anyways, it requires believing that the Jews fabricated a law code that they could not keep, a prophetic tradition that humiliates them, a rival religious system that nullifies their scriptures, and finally, a Messiah who abolishes their law, declares their rulers corrupt, throws open covenant membership to Gentiles, to the nations, and becomes the rallying point for a global religion that ends up persecuting, displacing, and marginalizing the Jewish people themselves. Genius. No group attempting self-preservation, world domination would ever invent a theological machine designed to blow up its own foundation. The theory is not merely wrong, it is logically impossible, requiring the Jews to be the most self-destructive propagandists in human history, inventing a story that destroys their tribe, their authority, their temple, their homeland, and their future power. Now, again, this only makes sense, what I'm saying, if you can understand that the Old Testament is not rabbinical Judaism, that these two ideologies are actually at war with each other, okay? And Christ came to defend Moses, but then also to abolish it and to bring the Bible back to the beginning, okay? Which we're going to go over a little bit more. Okay, so the theory collapses even further when the text itself is considered, okay? According to the Hebrew Bible, the covenantal birthright does not belong to Judah, the lineage of later Jews, but to Joseph, okay? And Joseph's heirs, Ephraim and Manasseh, are born to an Egyptian mother, okay, a priestess, daughter of a priest, so no way she converted. Okay. Egyptian mother. Jacob explicitly declared that Ephraim, not Judah, will become a multitude of nations. Blessing, multitude of nations, sorry. If there were a late Jewish fabrication, okay, if this were a late Jewish fabrication meant for ethnic self-exaltation or world control, it makes no sense to place the central blessing in a half-Gentile lineage while portraying Judah as morally flawed and politically secondary. No group invents a religion, okay, or a religious narrative that sidelines its own tribe and assigns the greatest promise to someone else, especially Egyptian pagans. Like, that's who the chosen people are in the Bible. They're Egyptians. That's who Ephraim and Manasseh are. They're Egyptians. Okay? And the Jews are like this half uncle, you know. Oy vey. Okay, so now let's go over Gentiles in Judaism. And we're going to look at the Vilna edition of the Talmud. Okay, now guys, you're going to have different editions of the Jewish Talmud. No different that you're going to have different editions of pagan mythology. You always want to try to go as old as possible. Try to find encyclopedias or sources. Like, I think this Vilna tradition of the Talmud goes back to this one's from the 1930s, I think, the one I'm using. But modern Talmuds are sanitized. They're not going to say things as blunt and direct. They're going to hide things in the translation so that they appear to be more kosher, or not kosher, that's probably the wrong term, to be more like, oh, that's not so bad. It's no different than when we read pagan mythology, how it's all been sanitized and cleansed, so that when you're reading it now, it's like, oh, it's not too bad, but it's actually been cleansed, right? And so the Talmud works the same way as pagan mythology, where you want to just try to go as old as you can, and sometimes you're just going to have to translate it from Hebrew into English, or just use the AI, I guess. So now here, when we go to the Talmud, now what this is doing, it's giving us an understanding of the Jewish mind during the time of Christ and the Jewish mind today. And when we read rabbis from the 1st, 2nd century, here we have Rabbi Yohanan, who says, "He who teaches the Torah to a Gentile is as if he had given it over to a dog." So what are the Gentiles being referred to? They're being referred to as beasts, as a dog. Okay? And then he goes to say that Moses commanded us the law, an inheritance of the congregation of Jacob, an inheritance for us, not for them. Okay, that's not true. All right. We're going to continue with the Talmud, and here we go. Okay, the secrets of the Torah are entrusted only to one who possesses 5 qualities, but if one entrusts them to the unworthy, he is like one who gives food to the dogs. Now again, too, let's keep in mind, Judaism is a religion of converts. You can convert to Judaism, and if you convert to Judaism, you are a Jew. Okay, that was my experience when I saw Jews in the synagogues. I was considered, by the religious Jews, I wasn't, unless I convert, I'll never be one of them, okay? Anyone who converts to Judaism through the Orthodox circles, you're a Jew, and your children will all be Jewish. So, don't think that this is also racially based, because the greatest rabbi in all of history was a convert to Judaism. Rabbi Akiva comes from a family of converts, okay? Apparently, Emperor Nero is the father of Rabbi Meir. And so, anyone can be a Jew. Now, this is the Genoic Midrash. This isn't the Talmud. It's still rabbinical Judaism. It's actually post-Talmud. It would be this period between maybe 400-500 AD to maybe 1000 AD. And it's still authoritative. Like, don't think that just because it's like Maimonides wrote something, like it's still rabbinical Judaism. It's just kind of like it has, the Jerusalem Talmud would be number one, and then the Babylonian Talmud would come second, and then after it builds on what's more authoritative, right? So here we have Rabbi Eliezer: whoever eats with an idolater, and this could be looked at as a Gentile or a Christian, is like a man who eats with a dog. So, so just like Rabbi Zera here, the secrets of the Torah are entrusted only to us. So it's like, so now you can see where's this language Jesus is using. Now, Jesus is using this language because his disciples are brainwashed with Judaism. So he's walking. If you notice, his disciples are like, "Ugh, send this girl away. Like, why is she following? Like, get rid of her. Get rid of this dog." And then Christ joins in. He agrees with them at first, and then what does he do? He shuts them all up. He heals her. He grants her request. He compliments her. He loves this woman. This woman just demonstrated the whole thing that God wants. Faith, believe in him. It doesn't matter who you are. Okay, so now we're going to just look at the Good Samaritan just to get a better example of this story, of what we're talking about, the Canaanite woman, okay? Because Samaritans, what is a Samaritan? I guess we're gonna before we go over this, I think we're gonna go over this a little bit later, but this is just in Luke that we're gonna talk about. Let's talk about what is a Samaritan. Okay, so Samaritans according to Judaism. Now, when we go to the Book of Kings, okay, so Samaria was the capital of Joseph. It was the capital of Ephraim, and it was the capital of northern Israel. So it was really Samaria versus Jerusalem. And the Israelites were the northern tribes, the tribes of Joseph and the 10 lost tribes they were pagan the whole time. They were never monotheists. They were always pagans. And so when the Assyrians came and conquered them, they removed the Israelites would have fled, got on their ships and gone away. And then the ones who decided to stay, the elites were taken over and sent into slavery into Assyria. But generally they leave the poor peasants to work the land, which there's no Bible verse that says they did that with Israel, but there is in 2 Kings 25, I think. That's what the Babylonians did to the Jews when when Nebuchadnezzar came in. It says specifically that they left the poor Jews to tend the lands. But in this story, the Assyrians are now importing people from Cutha, and this would be like a Babylonian city. It would have been, I don't know, maybe 100 miles or something away from Babylon. So it's not far from Babylon, this area. And so the Assyrians are going to import these people in to replace the Israelites they had just deported. So likewise, they would have left all the people left in Israel would have been the poor peasants to work the land, and then they would have brought in these Babylonians to rule over them. So, and then you would have a remnant of the Canaanites, of the people from Tyre, Sidon. Nebuchadnezzar never conquered Tyre. Okay, he failed at taking over Tyre. He did conquer Canaan, but he failed at taking the island. And at that point, a lot of the people on that island were Israelites too. They were all intermarried. So, so the people living in Samaria right now would be a mixture of Greeks, of bastard Israelites mixed with the Babylonians. These Cutha people would have mixed with the Israelites, and that's what a Samaritan really is. They're bastard Israelites with no genealogical record. There's nothing tying them. Okay, and so they're hated, they're despised. Okay, so the Babylonian Talmud, the Kutim worshipped an image of a dove on Mount Gerizim. Mount Gerizim is like in the heart of Ephraim. That is where the Samaritan Pentateuch, confirms this, that the northern Israelites did build a a temple on Mount Gerizim, and that was their temple. And when you read the Samaritan Pentateuch, it tells them that's where they're supposed to worship, not Jerusalem. Okay. So the Kutim, right, people from Kuta, are considered Gentiles. So in the eyes of the Jews, a Samaritan is a Gentile, even though they do have, some Israelite blood in them. The daughters of a Kutim are deemed menstruants from the cradle, which is to say unclean. So that's how they view Gentiles. That's how they view the nations. That's how they view people who aren't Jewish, as dirty and unclean. So the Samaritan is in the same situation as a Gentile, even though they do have Israelite blood. Okay. The testimony of a Kuti is invalid. So their testimony isn't even worth anything in court. So they're dirty, they're unclean, they're liars. Nothing they say can be true. What else does the Talmud say? Samaritan wine is forbidden like Gentile wine. You can't buy their goods. Don't buy from these people. If a Jew or a Gentile require assistance, the Jew takes precedence. So so you could see Jews put themselves first. Gentiles, you help if you can afterwards. Okay, the lost property of a Gentile, one is not obliged to return it. So you could see first century Judaism. This is the mind of not Jesus, of Jesus's apostles. This is what they grew up with. Okay. So this is really their struggle. Do you understand what's being said here? Jesus is not calling this woman a dog. Judaism teaches that woman is a dog. Judaism teaches that this woman is dirty and unclean. Judaism says you can't be with these people. And that's what Jesus is pointing out. That is the mind of the disciples, of the apostles, because they are coming out of this Pharisaic culture that has hijacked the laws of Moses. Okay? So, what does Moses say? Okay, the stranger who sojourns with you shall be to you as the native among you, and you shall love him as yourself. Where does Moses say the Gentiles are dogs? The foreigner amongst you, you treat like crap. Their testimony's worth nothing. You love them as yourself is what Moses commanded. That's how you're supposed to treat the foreigner that lives amongst you in your country. That's how this is how the Jews were supposed to do. But they don't, nope. They have their own law, the Talmud, the oral law, the laws of the rabbis that contradict Moses. Okay? He loves the sojourner, giving him food and clothing. Love the sojourner, therefore. Okay? As for the assembly, there shall be one statute for you and one for the stranger who sojourns with you. One law and one rule shall be for you and for the stranger. The only thing the stranger, the foreigner, would have to do if they wanted to partake in festive and temple rituals, temple feasts, then they might have to be circumcised if they lived in ancient Israel. Okay? That's it, all right? But other than that, Moses commands us to love the stranger as you would yourself. Okay? So when we come to the Good Samaritan, now we can actually, now that we understand the context, we understand what a Samaritan was to a Jew in the first century, now the story is going to make a little bit more sense. Okay, so it says, and behold, a certain lawyer, so probably would have been a Levite, stood up and tempted him, saying, Master, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? And he said unto him, what is written in the law? How do you read it? Now, a lawyer, so he's probably a scribe, he's probably a Levite, right? He's a student of law. And he answered and said, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul and with all your strength and with all your mind. Quoting Deuteronomy 5. That is a direct quote from Deuteronomy 6, verse 5. And love thy neighbor as yourself. Direct quote from Leviticus 19:18. Okay. And he said unto him, Thou hast answered right. You answered correctly. Christ is like, good, you nailed it. This do, so do this, and you will live. But he, willing to justify himself, said unto Jesus, But who is my neighbor? Okay, and Jesus answered and said, now this is where he tries to trap Jesus. Jesus tells him to love his neighbor as himself. Now, actually, when you read Leviticus 9:18, it's specifically talking about the children of Israel. But in the verses that we saw previously, in Leviticus 19:33, it tells you that you need to love the stranger as yourself. Okay, so the lawyer's trying to trap him now. Who is my neighbor? And Jesus answered and said, gives him a story. This is the parable. A certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among thieves, which stripped him of his raiment and wounded him and departed, leaving him half dead. And by chance there came down a certain priest. Very important, he uses a priest here. A priest came by that way, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side, and likewise a Levite. And likewise, okay, a Levite, when he was at the place, came and looked on him, passed by on the other side. So these two, now it's very important he's using a Levite and a priest, because these were the upper class elites in Judah at the time. Only a Levite can become a priest, right? So these are the teachers of the law. That's also very important because they're actually breaking the law. Now, what would happen here is there are purity laws. If you go near a dead body, you are impure. You're unclean for 7 days. And there's actually medical reasons for this. There's scientific reasons for this. It's because of the diseases and bacteria, parasites and stuff that can live on a dead body. So when you're if you go near a dead body, you have to separate yourself for 7 days back in the ancient world, in ancient Israel. So what's happening here is they can use that and say, well, we don't know if he's alive or dead, and we don't want to make ourselves impure, right, unclean. So we're following the law. We don't want to get They could use this, and the Talmud would argue like this. So now what happens in the story is, so these guys clearly just walk on the other side and ignore this guy, and this happens all the time now in the like, maybe not so much when I was a kid, but now people have become really cold. Like, you see even girls getting attacked in the subways, or and people do nothing. Like, people get molested on the streets and people do nothing. People just maybe pull out their phones and record at the best. And so we're living in this time where you see someone who's in need, people just look the other way. Even like I rescued a dog last year, and that dog sat there all day, right? Everyone walked by this dog. The dog was covered in blood. It had a hole in its head, its eye, and all day nobody just walked by it. They're cold, And then my friend, called me, and then I found the dog, and now the dog has made a full recovery. But most people will just walk on by, and that's what's happening in this story. So understand why it's important. It's a Levite and a priest, and now Christ is going to do something this would really piss off the Jews, because we now saw how the Jews viewed Samaritans, how they view Gentiles, and now you're comparing a Samaritan who was like a Gentile to the elites of the Jews, the priests and the Levites. Okay. But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion on him, and went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring in oil and wine, and set him on his own beast, and brought him to an inn, and took care of him. And on the where was I? And took care of him. And on the morrow, when he departed, he took out 2 pence and gave them to the host, and said unto him, take care of him, and whatsoever and if you spend more, when I come again, I will repay you. So now this guy is a lifesaver. This is the guy you want on your team. This is the guy you want to be friends with. You don't want to be friends with this priest. You don't want to be friends with this Levite. You want to be friends with this Samaritan. This guy is going to be there for you in bad times, right? And that's actually when you know who your friends are. It's not, and your family is. It's the ones who are there for you when you've got nothing left to offer. and hard times fall upon you, and they maybe see that it wasn't your, maybe there's some times where, tough love is needed, and the worst thing you could do is enable someone, but in a lot of cases, it's not until you hit rock bottom that you can see who your friends are. So this is really a guy who's going to be your friend through thick and thin. And so now Christ has outlined the story. Here's the Samaritan guy, which is pretty much who would you rather be friends with? Who would you rather have fighting on your team? You probably want the guy who's going to do whatever he can to make the situation better on your team. Which now of these three do you think was a neighbor unto him that fell among thieves? And what's interesting is the guy couldn't even bring himself to say, oh, the Samaritan. He said, well, the one who showed mercy. Okay? So here, if Christianity was this anti-Gentile, I don't even like this word Gentile, religion, if Christ really thought the Canaanite woman was a dog, okay, if Christ really hated Samaritans, why is he using this Samaritan to outshow the Jews and to show you who your neighbor really is, right? And you're supposed to, again, commanded by Moses to love the neighbor, the stranger, as yourself, okay? You're not supposed to call them dogs and say, oh, well, if they lose something, I don't have to return it. They're just a stupid Gentile, stupid goy. That's not what Moses said. That's what the rabbis teach. Okay, so now here's Christ in total opposition to Judaism, to the laws of the rabbis. Okay, so the priest and the Levite represent tradition first religion. They're following Talmudic principles. Okay, they know the law. They're supposed to serve the temple, and they preserve ritual status. Yet they walk past the dying man, violate Leviticus 19:16 and Leviticus 19:33, obey tradition while breaking Torah. You guys understand? The Samaritan fulfills Moses better than Israel's leaders. The Samaritan risks impurity, so he doesn't care that he's going to be separated from the congregation for 7 days. Okay, if the guy dies, maybe they don't know the state of the guy. Saves his life, shows mercy, pays the cost out of his own pocket, commits long-term care. He fulfills love of thy neighbor, love of a stranger, preservation of life, which again, that we're going back to Levitical law, justice and mercy. Okay? He keeps the Torah's intent perfectly, where the two guys in Christ's story, the guys who should have known the Torah better than anyone, were the ones breaking it. So here in this story, Christ is elevating the non-Jew. He's elevating the Samaritan, who the rabbis, put it into the garbage. Okay? So that is the story of the Good Samaritan. And again, you can only properly appreciate this story if you know Talmudic Judaism, if you know the first century context and the difference between the oral law and the Torah. So those guys are in violation of Moses, in violation of the Torah, and Christ is exposing them with the story, the parable of the Good Samaritan. So let's take a look at Abraham. And Abraham was justified by his faith, okay, not by law or by ritual. And Abraham is a Gentile. He is a pagan being called out of Babylon, or of the Chaldeans, at a time where was actually the ruling dynasty, the ruling city of the world. And during Abraham's time, there was no Torah. Abraham's going to live during a time, maybe 500 years before there was a Torah, okay, 400 or 500 years before. There's no Sinai covenant. There's no Levitical priesthood. No written law, no mandatory animal sacrifice system, no purity codes, no food laws. You could eat whatever you wanted. Okay, so Abraham was an uncircumcised Gentile, saved by grace through faith, declared righteous without a Torah. There was no Torah. Living without ritual law, honoring a Gentile priest. We're going to talk about that. Chosen to bless all nations. Okay, so now when we come to the New Testament, what does Paul say? How then was it counted to him, to Abraham? Was it before or after he had been circumcised? It was not after, it was before. Every single promise that God made to Abraham, the entire story of the old, the story of Israel to the coming of Christ, all comes down to a guy who was never circumcised. There was nothing Jewish, nothing Israelite, nothing Moses. It was a Gentile. It all starts with the Gentiles. It all starts with what you would say the Goyim. And now we're going to see that it all returns back to them. And that they were always the center of the story. It all starts with them. And that in the biblical history, it's really a 1500 year period between Moses and Christ where you have Mosaic law. And it all reverts back to the beginning, where there is no temple, there is no circumcision, doesn't matter what you eat. None of this stuff mattered. That stuff was temporary to show us that no one can keep the law, that every single person is guilty, and that when we die, there is a price to pay. And that nothing on earth will save you. You can't bribe God, nothing. That faith, belief, and hope and trust in God is the only thing that will save you. And I'm not an eternal hell, do what I say or you're going to burn forever kind of guy. That's all misinterpretation. There's mistranslations. The Bible's not. God's not a psychopath. We can talk about eternal hell. That's not what the Bible means. Don't freak out so much. I will talk about that another time, but don't stress too much, about your loved ones and stuff. We have a very merciful God. Anyways, we're going to talk about Melchizedek. I'm pretty sure that translates to "my king is righteous." That's what Malachi, Zedek. Okay, yeah, "my king is righteousness," something like that. Anyway, so we have Melchizedek, king of Salem, okay, who brought out bread and wine. Bread and wine, very important. He was a priest of the Most High God, and he blessed him, and Abraham gave him a tenth of everything. So here we have Abraham tithing, giving 10% of everything he has to the king of Salem, Melchizedek, who was a priest of the Most High God. We have a monotheistic Canaanite priest. He's not a Semite, as far as we know. He's living in Canaan. He's not a Jew. He's not an Israelite. He's not even related to Abraham. And here's Abraham paying homage to, as far as we know, a Canaanite priest, a Gentile priest who believes in God, okay, and is a teacher of the one true God, okay? And we have Abraham paying homage to him, paying tithes to him, supporting him and sacrificing for this non-Jewish, non-Israelite, as far as we know, a Canaanite priest believing in the one true God. Okay, so Melchizedek is not an Israelite or a Jew. He predates Israel. He predates circumcision. He predates Torah. He predates the Levitical priesthood. He predates. Okay, so he's explicitly called priest of God Most High. He blesses Abraham. Abraham gives him a tithe, tithing him 10% of what he owns. So this means the Gentile priesthood precedes Israel and the Jews. So in the biblical story, before there's the temple, it's all on the Gentiles. It all starts with them. And now it's going to do a full circle and come right back to them. Okay? All right. Now, all throughout the New Testament, even during the time of Israel, what do we notice? That the Gentiles are always being exalted. Naaman the Syrian, say a Syrian general. So he was a Gentile military commander from Syria who suffered from leprosy, some kind of skin disease. And though initially resistant, he humbled himself, obeyed Elisha's words, was healed, and confessed that there is no God in all of the earth except for the God of Israel. Jesus later named cities Naaman as an example of Gentiles' faith surpassing Israel's unbelief. So all throughout the Bible, that's what you're going to find. You're going to find it has nothing to do with bloodline. It has to do with faith, with your belief in God. Okay? Let's keep going. Uriah the Hittite. This is one of my favorites. Okay, so Uriah was a Gentile soldier, as far as we know, serving faithfully in Israel's army. He was one of David's captains, a Gentile promoted to captain. He demonstrated greater righteousness and loyalty than King David by refusing comfort while Israel was at war. His integrity stands in moral contrast to David's sin. So if you guys don't know the story of Uriah, Uriah was a Hittite and he was serving in the Israelite army as a captain under for King David. This is a really sad and terrible story. And Uriah actually had a very beautiful wife. And Uriah was so loyal that while he was away on campaign, David sees his wife. This is the mother of King Solomon and Bathsheba. And he sees, David sees this woman through the window, and he's just, he's the king. He could have any woman he wants, and he brings this woman, orders her over to his place. He sleeps with her, commits adultery. King David is not a good guy, okay? King David was only good because no one had the faith King David had. It's not to say King David was a good man. King David was not the greatest man. But he had an enormous amount of faith in God. And that is why, I guess, and is probably why he was chosen. Okay? But anyways, David ends up impregnating this soldier's wife. Now, to hide the pregnancy, he orders Uriah to come back. Come back. Orders Uriah back home, come back from the front lines, and wants Uriah to go and sleep with his wife, so that when she's pregnant, at least it's to as long as he sleeps with his wife, it can hide the fact David is the real father. And so Uriah, though so loyal to David, says, no, what have I done to deserve coming home? My soldiers are fighting and dying on the front lines. I get called back. If my men can't eat like me, if my men can't sleep with their wives, I'm not going to sleep in my bed. I'm not going to sleep with my wife because my men are fighting and dying on the front lines. The guy was so loyal and so honorable. And here's the Bible showing you this Gentile, this non-Jew, non-Israelite, who's just showing such loyalty, and not just to the king, but to his men on the front lines, fighting and dying for Israel. And what does King David do in the end? King David sends Uriah with a letter, with instructions on the letter, that when he arrives on the front line, he gives the letter to one of King David's family members, I think an uncle, and might have been Joab. And then when he opens it, the letter said, kill Uriah. Put Uriah on the battlefield in one of the worst spots, and then call the men back so the enemy kills him. Make it look like an accident. So David murders him. David commits adultery, murders him, lies. David is portrayed as the biggest scumbag in the world in this story. And the Gentile, the Hittite Uriah, is elevated and shown as the most righteous man probably in the entire book of Samuel. All right? And it's a Gentile, right? It's a non-Israelite, non-Jew. Meanwhile, the greatest Israelite, King David, is shown to be a piece of garbage, right? Rahab the Canaanite. So Rahab was a Canaanite prostitute. Again, it comes down to her faith, just like Naaman, just like Abraham, people who just believed in God. And that's when God's like, the Canaanite woman, your faith, your belief in me, right? So Rahab was a prostitute, and she protected two of Israel's spies when they went into Jericho, but she really believed in the God of Israel. She's like, hey, I know what you guys did in Egypt, and I know God is with you guys. And so Rahab is so blessed for her faith in God that she is actually the great-great-grandmother of King David. And so she is part of the messianic line. This Canaanite prostitute is blessed to the point where the Messiah is going to be born from her line. Okay, same thing with when we come to Ruth. I think Ruth is probably the next one. Yeah, so Ruth the Moabitess. So now we've got a woman from Moab. It was a Gentile woman from Moab, and she was so in love with her Ephraimite or Ephratite Israelite grandmother or mother, Naomi, and she had so much faith in the God of Israel that she became the great-grandmother of King David. And then Rahab would be the great-great-grandmother of King David. So placing a foreigner at the heart of Israel's royal and messianic lineage. So here we've got two Gentile women, Canaanite and Moabite, placed as mothers within the Davidic line. The widow Zarephath of Zarephath. So in this story, I think it's with Elijah. Yeah, during a famine in Israel, God sent Elijah. Okay, not to an Israelite, but to a Gentile widow in Sidon, and she obeyed the prophet's experience miraculous provision, and saw her son raised from the dead. Okay. Jesus explicitly highlighted this story to show God's mercy towards Gentiles when Israel lacked faith. So all throughout the New Testament, Old Testament, you're going to find these examples of it has never had anything to do with bloodline, really. It always had to do with faith. Even when a blessing comes to a bloodline, it starts with their faith in God. Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, half Egyptian patriarchs. So again, Ephraim and Manasseh, born to Joseph and an Egyptian mother, making them ethnically mixed. Okay, Jacob formally adopted them as full tribes of Israel, granting them equal inheritance and covenant status. Ephraim even received the greater blessing, showing that covenant identity is not based on bloodline alone. And what was Joseph? He was the son who had the most faith in God. And that's what it comes down to. It's about faith. It's about trusting and believing in the programmer of the matrix. Okay, that someone built this. It has nothing to do with your bloodline. It has to do with your faith and your trust in him. Okay, so the Jews rejected the Gentiles and God rejected the Jews. So we're now going to look at the cause of the Roman-Jewish War, which is going to tie into the book of Daniel, the great abomination of that brings desolation in Daniel 12 that Jesus quotes in Matthew 24. I talk about this more in my other videos, so we're not going to go too into it, but the point I want to draw out is we read in history that, and at that time, Eleazar, the son of Ananias, the high priest, a very bold youth who was at that time governor of the temple, persuaded those that officiated in the divine service to receive no gift or sacrifice from any foreigner. And that was the true beginning of the war with the Romans. So what caused the Roman-Jewish War, which now is going to lead to the full destruction of the Jews in Judea and Jerusalem and the temple? It was when, this is the great abomination of desolation. It's when the Jews made it illegal for the Gentiles to worship God, which is a direct violation of Mosaic law, okay, which we went over. So the Gentiles are allowed to make offerings and sacrifices at the temple, but the Jews are like, no, only Jews can worship God. It's our God, not yours. Caesar, they stop the sacrifice to Caesar. They forbid Gentiles from making offerings, and this starts the Roman-Jewish War, and now the Jews are marked with total destruction. That is the abomination that makes desolation, that has to do with the daily sacrifice being taken away. They took the daily sacrifices away from the Gentiles, okay? If foreigners could no longer offer sacrifices to the God of Israel, it meant they were being cut off from worshiping him through the temple, the very institution God designed to draw the nations to himself. Josephus tells us that this exclusion marked the true beginning of the war, and Jesus had already warned that that turning God's house inward would bring desolation. Okay, and he taught, saying unto them, "Is it not written that my house shall be called of all nations the house of prayers? But you have made it a den of thieves." Quoting Isaiah, "Even them will I bring to my holy mountain and make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices shall be accepted upon mine altar, for my house shall be called a house of prayer for all people, all nations." So all Jesus is doing here is quoting the Old Testament, where God says, my house will be for all people, everyone. It's not a Jewish only thing, an Israelite only thing, any of that stuff. It's for all people. It's always been for all people. All right. So again, Moses says, "The stranger who sojourns with you shall be to you as the native among you, and you shall love him as yourself. He that loves the sojourner, giving him food and clothing, love the sojourner therefore. As for the assembly, there shall be one statute for you, and for the stranger who sojourns with you, one law, one rule shall be for you and for the stranger." Okay. So again, coming back to our story, the Bible calls the Gentiles dogs. Make sure that you guys understand what's actually happening in this story. Jesus is in no way saying that he's only for the Israelites and that the Gentiles are dogs. It's not what he's doing. If that were true, he wouldn't have healed the woman's daughter. He wouldn't have given her a request. You're a dog, get away from. No, he does the opposite. Judaism teaches that the Gentiles are dogs. They're unworthy, they're unclean. Okay, no different than the Samaritan. We went over the Talmudic, the oral laws. Jesus is rebuking that, bringing us back to Moses, where it says what? Love them as yourself. They are your neighbors. Treat them well. Okay, so it comes down to faith. Abraham's faith is what made him Abraham. Naaman's faith is what healed him. It was Ruth's faith that made her, blessed her to the point where she's going to be the mother of the messianic line. Rahab's faith. Oh, I'm going to help these guys because I believe. That's what it came down to. And this Canaanite woman was never a dog in the eyes of Christ. Never a dog in the eyes of Moses. Never a dog in the eyes of God. Okay? Of the God of Israel. The God of the universe. Never. Okay? So I hope that makes sense to you guys and that it helps separate Judaism from the Old Testament, that Christ's entire ministry, as we've been seeing with the last videos that we did, Christ's whole ministry is about attacking rabbinical Judaism. You cannot understand what's happening in this story if you do not understand Talmudic rabbinical Judaism. You cannot understand, and we're going to go over the Good Samaritan without, understanding the Talmud, the oral traditions. Okay, so conclusion is this: Moses commands Israelites to treat the sojourner with justice and with compassion. Judaism, the Talmud, the oral traditions, calls Gentiles dogs. Judaism contradicts Moses and the Torah. Christ never called the Gentiles dogs. Christ was exposing Judaism in this story. The Bible begins with Gentiles and ends with Gentiles. The Bible exalts Gentiles to the highest positions. God destroys the temple and Jerusalem immediately after the Jews outlawed Gentiles from worshiping him. Okay? To call the Bible a Jewish-only book is to miss the point entirely, since it begins with uncircumcised Gentiles and ends with the nations returning to God the same way. Calling the Bible Judaism ignores the fact that the New Testament is a confrontation with rabbinical oral law, not an endorsement of it. To label the Bible as Judaism is to misunderstand the Old and New Testaments, which presents Christ not as a reformer of rabbinic oral law, but as its challenger and corrector. Christ was the enemy of Judaism, of rabbinical Judaism. All these people you see walking today with the hats on, the yarmulke, well, that's a great thing too. Why do they wear yarmulkes? Show me that in the Old Testament. It's not there. That yarmulke didn't become a law till 1,000 years ago. 1,000 years ago. Not even, they weren't wearing little hats during Christ's time. No one even, if you were to talk to a Jew today and say, wait, go back 2,000 years and talk to a Jew then, and you'd see, hey, where's your yarmulke? My what? Your yarmulke. You need one. You can't enter the building, the synagogue without one. What the hell are you talking about? They invent laws upon laws upon laws upon laws until it has nothing to do with what was originally written. And that is rabbinical Judaism. It's a new religion. Christ was at war with these Jews. Okay, so Jesus helps the Canaanite woman. Gentiles are dogs. Okay, I hope that story makes sense to you guys and helps you when people are going to, oh, you worship a Jew, the God of the Jews. Come on, guys. You get them to define Judaism. Okay, what is the religion of Ben Shapiro? What's the religion of Jews? It's the Talmud. It's the oral law. You're Jewish through your mother. Where does it say that? Show me from the Bible. And that is going to be your biggest struggle. It's my biggest struggle too. I get, we need to know what's written in our book. And that's Christianity. Christ's example, Paul's example, that's Christianity. To be a Christian doesn't mean flood your country with immigrants and exterminate your people. That's not they're Jew and Gentile, we're one in Christ. What does that mean? Like, somehow people are going to take that and interpret that as, you see, it means open the borders and let everybody in. Like, no, it doesn't. To say that it doesn't matter if you're Jewish or if you're a Greek, you can believe in the same God. That's it. Love each other as you want to be loved. Treat others how you want to be treated. Don't let people be like, you see, it means let every immigrant from India and Pakistan and China into your country. No, that's insanity. It just means everyone can believe in God. Doesn't mean you can't have laws in your country, you know, stopping people from genociding your people. Like, it's insane. So anyways, we're going to keep going with this. We're going to, next time, I think tomorrow, I'll try to do this tomorrow. Jesus heals the blind man. Like, what really happened in that story? Okay, this flies over. Again, you cannot understand this story unless you know the Talmud. It's like, what, does Jesus have magical spit and he could cure you with his spit? That's probably what Christians believe. No. Jesus in this story is gaslighting the Jews. He is just driving them insane by doing the spit in the dirt and making mud and putting that on his eyes. He is violating the Talmud. He is going against Judaism with something so silly as mixing his spit with mud and fighting the rabbis who invent the most insane laws. And same thing with healing the man at Bethesda, not Fallout or whatever. The pool at Bethesda, which this pool was found, described exactly as the Bible describes it, with 5 porches. Okay, so we're going to go over this because this story is just like John, and unless you know the religion of the Jews, the Talmud, the oral law, this guy carrying his mat into, after being healed, makes no sense to anybody. If you do not know the oral law, you don't know the New Testament. You need to know who Jesus was fighting. You need to know Judaism versus Moses. Otherwise, none of it's going to make sense. All right? So I think that's it for now. We're going to stop there, and I'm going to try to upload this before Christmas. Anyways, thanks everyone who donated. You guys really saved my life again. And I'm going to try to upload the next video tomorrow. And yeah, that's it. So again, thank you guys for watching, and I hope you guys are well.